Now, I've talked about this thing called intelligent design, which was the theory that was presented as an alternative to evolution. So what is intelligent design? Religious people of all stripes believe that there really is an intelligent design to the universe, which is the work of the Creator. And for what it's worth, that's what I happen to believe myself. But this is actually, in this context, not what is meant by intelligent design. Intelligent design, in terms of this argument, means something else. And it is the claim that design, and what is meant by design here is outside supernatural puff of smoke intervention, is required to account for the origins of living things. That means that intelligent design, or ID as I will call it, is actually a doctrine of special creation. Species appear because a creator makes them. And in this respect, it's really nothing newer than good old-fashioned creationism, sort of spiffed up to make it sound scientific and to appear non-religious. So I want to tell you how people go about arguing for this. One of their principal claims is that evolution cannot explain the origin of complex biochemical machines. That's a bacterium, and the little whips you see coming out of one end are called flagella. A lot of bacteria, including E. coli, in your stomach right now, have little flagella. These flagella are enormously complex, and they spin around like crazy to propel this bacterium through liquids of all sorts, including ones inside your body. Now, the argument is that these flagella, which at a molecular level are really quite complex and quite beautiful, possess something called irreducible complexity. And that means that even in principle, they just couldn't have been produced by evolution. That's the argument. So if evolution couldn't have produced them, they must have been designed or they must have been produced in a puff of smoke creation. And Michael Behe, who did testify in the trial for the school board, says you can't produce irreducibly complex systems by modifying a previous system. That's how evolution would do it, because any precursor to one of these complex systems that is missing a part is by definition non-functional. If the flagellum has 30 proteins and you're missing 2 or 3 or 4, it doesn't work. And therefore evolution could not gradually have produced 10 parts, 15, 20 parts, knowing that a couple million years in the future these parts would be useful. They got to be useful right now. That's true, by the way. And therefore it couldn't have produced this flagellum. That's the argument. Now, in case people don't get this flagellum, Dr. Behe likes to make an analogy to a mousetrap. And some of you may have noticed I'm sure that all of you lead such vermin-free lives that you've probably never seen a mousetrap. But I brought one along with me. And a mousetrap has 5 parts. It's got a base plate, bait holder, a little hammer, a spring, and then a catch. And it's true that if you take any of these parts away, the mousetrap seemingly will not work. So all these parts have to be together at the same time in order to have function. And as Dr. Behe has written, all the components have to be in place before you can catch any mice. Therefore, it's irreducibly complex, just like the bacterial flagellum. Now, putting it in a more graphic way, the machine itself, whether it's a flagellum, whether it's a mousetrap, or whether it's some other combination of proteins, has a function. And that function can be favored by natural selection. But the individual parts, he argues, don't have any function until you put them all together. Because of that, they couldn't have evolved. And what he has written is, since natural selection requires a function to select, no argument there, it's true, an irreducibly complex biochemical system would have to arise all at once for natural selection. That, as you'll see, is not true. But that's the argument for all of this. So putting it again graphically, if you have a complex machine, it has a function that can be favored by natural selection. But the individual parts have no function. Therefore, they cannot be shaped by natural selection. Therefore, this machine couldn't have evolved. Therefore, proof of the designer. Well, that's pretty powerful. How does evolution explain that? Well, the way that evolution explained it, and Darwin actually explained it as well, is that's a false view. These complex machines actually arise from simpler machines with limited numbers of parts, and the components themselves originate with different functions. As these parts get put together, new functions emerge, and the final function emerges only when you put the parts together. So natural selection can work on these all the way through. Now, that's not evidence, that's just an argument. But the cool thing about this, it enables you to test this argument by holding these two up. If the intelligent design guys are right, the parts of these complex machines should be useless on their own. But if evolution is right, these parts should turn out to do other jobs in the cell. So let's check it out. Let's see exactly what happens. Let's start with that bacterial flagellum. There it is, and this is from a biochemical review article. It's got about 30 different proteins, so let's do an experiment. Let's take away not one part, not 2 or 3. Let's take away all but 10 of its parts. Now, the cool thing about computers is they make these experiments really easy. Watch this. Whoops, there they go. So I've taken away all but 10 parts, and the 10 I've left are the 10 that span the biological membrane. Here is another review showing exactly what these 10 parts are. Well, if intelligent design argument is right, then what's left behind, because we've taken all these parts away, this should be non-functional. But it turns out it's not non-functional. These 10 proteins perform to the cell that has them an absolutely vital function that has nothing to do with flagellar motility. They make something up called the type 3 secretory system, which is a little molecular syringe that really nasty bacteria use to pump our cells full of poisons and to kill them. Now, these 10 parts have nothing to do with flagellar movement, but they are still functional. So what does that do to the argument? Remember what the argument was. Any precursor to an irreducibly complex system that is missing a part is by definition non-functional. There's the complex system. This guy is missing 20 parts. Is it non-functional? It is perfectly functional. So what that tells us is this statement, which is not a peripheral one. This is the heart and soul of the intelligent design argument. It tells us that statement is wrong. There is no other word for it. And it turns out when we analyze the bacterial flagellum itself, these are the proteins associated with the type 3 secretory apparatus, but it turns out just about every other protein in the flagellum actually has a function of its own in a system elsewhere in the cell unrelated to flagellar movement. And you know what that means? It means that when we actually analyze the flagellum, it fits the evolution prediction, which is that the parts should have functions of their own. And so they do. Now, the flagellum is not the only argument where this breaks down.